The Edmonton Oilers feel like a shoo-in to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. As far as the rest of the Pacific Division goes, the bottom half is creeping up.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming season will be my 10th doing digital hockey content and my 4th as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team covered every single day. And I want to make sure to thank everyone who's been here through the long, arduous summer. And I know there are fans of other teams who are begrudging Oilers fans because the season for the Oilers has bled into June each of the last 2 seasons. But to start out today's show, we are going to work our way backwards from the bottom from last year's division. So, yes, we will be starting with the San Jose Sharks. Our plan is to go in reverse order of the standings last year. We will start with the Sharks, make our way up through Vegas. Obviously, we'll skip the Oilers because we've spent the entire summer previewing the Oilers and talking about what their season's going to look like. So, to start things out, I think it's important that we frame this conversation about the Sharks around trajectory and perspective, because not every team is going to enter the season with the same goal. And we talked about this quite a bit 2 weeks ago on the episode where we talked about perspective and trying to take meaning out of seasons, even if they don't ultimately culminate in a championship. And I think for most of us out there, the Oilers' expectation is they're going to win a championship. And if they don't, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be action here as my light finally started to work. There we go. Beautiful. Nice. My face well lit. But when it comes to the Sharks, we know their goal is to not win the Stanley Cup this year. We know the Sharks' goal is to start setting up the core so that 2 years from now, they can be where Montreal is presently. I really like some of the pieces the Sharks have. I will gas up Macklin Celebrini here for a second, purely because the motor is impressive. At that age, at that size, generally there might be a bit of apprehension. There might be a bit of worry for a guy getting to good habits. And what impressed me the most about watching Celebrini's rookie campaign was his willingness to stay on puck carriers, to chase the puck like a dog chasing a tennis ball. That type of mindset, that type of mentality, it was awfully impressive to watch happen in real time. And now you get to see how good he can be. And I think it's important that he got his feet under him. And I think the Sharks, by benefit of being on the West Coast, by not being in a particularly intensive hockey market, have a little bit more benefit of the doubt than, say, Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks, who, if you'll recall, and I talked about this the other day, Connor Bedard was getting it pretty hard from national media people for not being the most complete 200-foot player as a 19-year-old on one of the worst teams in the entire NHL. Whereas Celebrini, the conversation was largely around his friendship with Will Smith, the emergence perhaps of a Fabian Zetterlund. They have enough pieces, the Sharks do, and they've spent money a little liberally in free agency. Jeff Skinner, Alex Wenberg, Tyler Toffoli. They have gone after veterans to kind of line the pockets, to give those young guys opportunities to not necessarily need to carry a crazy share of the load, but at the same time, instead of asking those young guys to carry the load, there's a reasonable expectation here that everybody knows the plan. 2 or 3 years from now, the Sharks will need to start turning these prospects and draft picks into players. But for right now, it is about getting an understanding of how good Celebrini can be, how good Will Smith can be, how good these depth guys, Shakir Makhmadulin, of course, the prospect they got in the Timo Meier trade from the Devils. There is a reasonable chance here for this to all work out well for the Sharks. It is important to maintain discipline. It's important to take deep breaths. And look, I've been very critical of Mike Greer for some of the dumb decisions he's made as far as guys like claiming Barclay Goodrow off of waivers and filling out the roster with actively bad guys. And look, the Sharks are going to take it on the chin this year. I'll be very curious to see what Askarov does if he can take that net full time and really kind of get the ground running. Because if you've got Celebrini, you've got Will Smith, you have Askarov, okay, you start to identify the core of what that team's going to be when it comes time for them to be competitive. Now, after the Sharks, who I feel at least a little optimistic about, I don't think they will finish dead last again. We get to the team I do think will finish dead last. And I have been an extremely harsh critic of the Seattle Kraken. Since they came into the league, it has felt like a perpetual kicking the can down the road situation. Ron Francis had a long tenure in Carolina where the Hurricanes didn't accomplish a whole lot, and he was able to parlay that experience. Of course, Hall of Famer as a player, you do get credit for that. That does give you credence for what you say. But at the same time, the Kraken have no identity. They have no sense of direction. They have no stars. They have spent liberally in free agency on players like Ryan Lindgren, on guys like Yanni Gourde, who I know they had extended but ultimately ended up trading, Brandon Montour. It is hard to feel good about the direction in Seattle. I think the way they have churned over coaches is not a particularly good look. I think when you want to point blame for the problems they have, I think it is far more on Ron Francis, who has insulated himself by promoting himself to president of hockey operations. You have Jason Botterill, who his first GM stint in Buffalo did not go particularly well. And you have Lane Lambert, whose first coaching stint as head coach of the New York Islanders did not go particularly well. So I do think the Kraken are putting themselves in a really disadvantageous position where they are not making progress towards a goal. It is okay to be bad for a couple seasons in professional sports. Sometimes that's just the cycle you find yourself in. But until you start making active steps to get out of that negative cycle, you start to become a perpetual loser. And right now, this Kraken organization feels like they're going to be in really rough shape going forward. And it's unfortunate because they entered the league with so much fanfare. People were excited to see if they could mirror the success Vegas had as a new expansion franchise. And other than the one season, which to their credit, they did beat the defending Stanley Cup champion Avalanche in a best-of-7 playoff series and make it to the second round and fared pretty well in that second round. I have been very, very bearish on their trajectory simply because I don't see it. The talent is not here for them to seriously compete. Joey Daccord is good. Vince Dunn is good. Matty Beniers has been good at the NHL level, but they're not showing you anything crazy. They're not showing you anything remarkable. We're still waiting to see if Shane Wright is a guy, even though he was drafted a number of years ago now. The Kraken are in really rough shape. And look, with as much veteran talent as they have, they probably won't be the worst team in the NHL, but God, are they going to be boring. And arguably, if you're not going to win the Stanley Cup, if you're not a bona fide cup contender, there might be nothing worse you could be to your fan base than boring. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll dive into the Ducks and Flames, who are still hanging around. Oh, and of course, the Vancouver Canucks. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's where our friends at Monarch Money come in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances or the thought of getting your money together is anxiety-inducing, Monarch is here for you. Monarch does all of the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, and get smart categorization of your spending. And finally, feel in control of your money. And Monarch Money promises you will never, ever touch a spreadsheet. Monarch made me aware of something facing my generation very badly. I wasn't saving enough money. With how expensive things are, it's really hard to meet long-term and short-term financial goals. If you want to pay off a vacation ahead of time, Monarch can help set you up with a payment schedule to put your money aside so you're not financing a vacation. Do not let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. One more time, that's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers as we are breaking down the Pacific Division from an Oilers perspective. So real quick, the Sharks are not a threat. The Kraken are not a threat. If I had to start ranking these teams as we went, I think the Kraken are the worst. I think the Sharks, though they have massive questions on their defense and in net, I think they have more than enough guys to have upward trajectory. And I think ultimately that's what matters for the Sharks. And speaking of upward trajectory, I do think it's important that when we talk about the Ducks next, I think the Ducks have an outside shot of hanging around this year. That is not exactly a ringing endorsement, but they have slowly but surely built a core around that Mason McTavish cohort. And we'll see about Zellweger. We'll see about Jackson Lacombe. They have drafted in the top 5 of drafts for what feels like the last 10 years. They had Jamie Drysdale and Trevor Zegras. They ultimately opted to go in a different direction, trying to get a little more rugged, a little more nasty. And to be transparent, I think Pat Verbeek was desperate. I think when you are desperate, you will do things that are out of character or don't reflect well on you. And for all of Joel Quenneville's success, for all of Joel Quenneville's Stanley Cup success, his pedigree, his wins, his accolades, you don't hire a guy coming out of the situation he was, that investigation, that landscape, without feeling like you're getting some of that stink on you. And I know there are going to be people who watch this video and call me all types of epithets and call me woke and call me soft. Good teams, they don't make these types of decisions. And candidly, I was very harsh on the Oilers for hiring Stan Bowman. I still don't think they should have hired Stan Bowman. But in the sense of that transparency, I think if you're desperate, you will do weird things. And hiring Joel Quenneville, who has not coached in a number of years, who has the stink of that Chicago Blackhawks scandal on him, to try and coax a team from 80 points to 95 points to save your job if you're Pat Verbeek, that's not a great look. And obviously perception only matters to people like me who aren't in hockey. The hockey world does not care. And you can say that's morbid. You could say that's cynical, but very clearly the hockey world does not care. We're going to see guys like Carter Hart get another look at the NHL level purely because of their talent. And teams are willing to overlook things if you have the talent. But I think the Ducks have a good chance to leapfrog the Flames and the Canucks in the pecking order. It would not surprise me if they hung around. They ended up with 90, 92 points, but I think the Central Division probably gets 5 playoff teams again, or at least 4, meaning it's going to really require you to leapfrog one of the Oilers, Kings, or Golden Knights if you would like to make the playoffs, at least to have a good chance to make the playoffs. So the Ducks are making progress. I'll give credit where it's due. I like the Chris Kreider trade. I know things did not end well for him in New York, but I feel pretty strongly that Kreider's a guy who, out of a spotlight, in a supporting cast role, I do think he was miscast in New York to some degree as being a savior type player, a superstar, when in reality he's more of a star. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. He does have a 50-goal season under his belt, but I do think we all can understand that's an extreme outlier season. But the Ducks are in reasonable shape to start making progress. Lucas Dostal is worth mentioning as well, their young goalie, somebody who I think has potential top 10 goalie in the NHL stuff. He has a lot of talent, but environment does matter a lot. And that Ducks team, man, that is about a difficult environment as you're going to throw a young goalie into. And they have the chance to be a decent team this year, but I think more likely than not, they're probably 2 years away from making a serious push towards a playoff spot. That army of veterans, the Stromes, Vetrano, Trouba, Killorn, they have slowly but surely accumulated guys with playoff experience from better teams in hopes that they would be able to marshal along the Mason McTavish group. But I think the Ducks can make some noise this year. I do not think they are a playoff team, but I think they could probably, if all breaks right for them, they could potentially be the first team out looking in. And that doesn't sound like a huge accomplishment, but when you've been as bad as the Ducks have been for as long as they've been, that would be progress for Pat Verbeek. Next up, the Vancouver Canucks, and I'll be candid. Your guess is as good as mine, friends. I really have no idea what to expect. Are you getting fringe Hart Trophy, 120-point elite defense, Elias Pettersson? Or are you getting 45 points, I hate JT Miller, Elias Pettersson? And look, I give as somebody who generally sides on the side of the guy who is being subjected to toxic behavior, I am not ready to write Elias Pettersson off. Okay. I think there is something there that can be scratched into. Now, you've got a new head coach. You have Evander Kane. You have Quinn Hughes openly talking about playing for the New Jersey Devils so he could play with Luke Hughes and his other brother, Jack. That's not great. Thatcher Demko cannot stay healthy. I think Demko is an incredible goalie. I think there is a world where if Demko stays healthy, the Canucks could make the playoffs this year. But I am just so unbelievably skeptical, being that he has had a hard time. And I go back to an old Bill Belichick quote, is that injured players get injured, meaning that if a guy is repeatedly getting hurt over and over and over again, it becomes harder for him to stay healthy. And that's not exactly breaking news, and it's not exactly a particularly insightful comment. But when I think about the Canucks and how they rode that success 2 years ago, where they were one of the better teams in the NHL, they had the Oilers on the ropes in the second round. Thatcher Demko was incredible for them, and their special teams were really good. Their 5-on-5 play was middling at best, but you got Pettersson, you got Quinn Hughes, you got Thatcher Demko. If everyone's healthy, that's a pretty good baseline. I personally am ready to make the argument Quinn Hughes was better than Makar last year. I know Quinn Hughes only played 59, 60 games. Makar, of course, won the Norris Trophy again, but Quinn Hughes has the capacity to be the best defenseman in hockey. Demko can be one of the 5 best goalies. That's pretty workable. That is a strong foundation and something that can accomplish a whole lot. And just real quick on the Canucks, when you are constantly in these cycles, when you are constantly in these struggles, it puts you in a perpetual state of hair on fire. When you're running around like your hair's on fire all of the time, it puts you in such a challenging position. It does not help that Jim Rutherford is constantly talking to the media, constantly saying things he shouldn't be, constantly being transparent when it's not beneficial to the team. It's not great. And then real quick, we'll do the Flames in this segment because I don't have a huge amount to say. This is a weird team. They extended Ryan Huska on Thursday of last week. They are not being aggressive. And look, I understand for Craig Conroy, their GM, this is about getting to that next wave of guys. And the Farabee and Morgan Frost trade in season last year was interesting. I think the fact that you have Rasmus Andersson openly trying to facilitate his own movement to the Vegas Golden Knights is not a great look in particular for you if you're the Flames. But this is a smaller market team that does not have the track record of recent success that the Oilers do, that does not feature a superstar talent like McDavid or Draisaitl, that has a harder time attracting marquee players. The Flames, and I think Conroy, understand that if they want to be a serious Stanley Cup contender, they are going to need to get young guys in there, bring them along slowly, and have those guys seize the reins, have those guys take control. And real quick, I'm very curious to see what Matt Coronado does for them. I know Dustin Wolf will get most of the attention. He was a fringe Vezina guy last year. Frankly, he was one of the more impressive goalies I saw. Undersized, former 7th-round pick. Really easy story to sink your teeth into and get invested in. But I want to see the Flames put themselves in a position to hang around. And they did. To the Flames' credit last year, Dustin Wolf kept that team afloat for a good chunk of the season. He kept them in games. He kept them up there in the standings. And they ultimately dissipated just because they couldn't score enough. And that's arguably the hardest thing to do in the NHL is score consistently, especially at 5-on-5. But I want to see the Flames give Dustin Wolf a chance. Obviously, this is an Oilers podcast. I don't want to see the Flames do better than the Oilers. But at the end of the day, the more good teams there are in the NHL, the better that is for everybody because everybody's incentivized to be more competitive. And then real quick, just wanted to give a shout out. Jess Belmosto did her last show as host of Locked On Flames last Friday. Jess is the one who got me involved in the Locked On Podcast Network. I started out once or twice a week on Locked On Flames, then got up to every single day, and I would not be where I am in the Locked On Network without her. Her coverage of the Flames was always very insightful, very warm, and very conversational. Felt like talking to one of your friends. So the network will miss you, Jess. You are one of one, and I'm very grateful for what you did for me. Thank you so much. We are going to take our second and final break of today's show. When we come back, we will talk about the playoff teams in this division. Mondays on Monarch and then FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the FanDuel app. I love FanDuel because it makes however you want to play easy. If you don't want to pick the game and you just want to do player props, FanDuel's got you. If you want to put together a same game parlay for a squad ride and watch the game together with your friends, FanDuel's got you. Or if you're watching the game and you feel the momentum swinging underfoot, live betting, FanDuel's got you. The NFL this week, the look-ahead lines are not great, candidly. The slate is not incredible. I'm scared to see what the Philadelphia Eagles do to Jackson Dart on Thursday Night Football, but I would not sleep, and this is not a ringing endorsement, of course, but the Seahawks at the Jaguars is kind of a good game. As somebody who's been a Sam Darnold and Trevor Lawrence truther for a lot of his life, I will definitely be tuned in on that game next Sunday. So, FanDuel has one question. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And we're only a couple days away from the start of the season. You're watching this episode. Well, I'm on my last day of vacation. Tomorrow, there will be one last pre-recorded episode. And then Wednesday night, the Oilers kick off the season against the Flames. Battle of Alberta off rip. I will have an episode for you Wednesday morning to set the table. Then Thursday morning to break down the first game of the regular season. Cannot wait to be watching Sportsnet again. So, in continuing our conversation, making our way through this Pacific Division, I would be remiss if I did not take a moment to say, I think the Kings got worse. Cody Ceci and Brian Dumoulin stink. They're old. They were old 2 years ago. Oiler fans can attest to Cody Ceci's volatility. I am not somebody who is particularly moved by a defenseman who can just skate well. And look, if there's a Game 7 in Cody Ceci, the Mr. Game 7 bit, it's funny. It's cute. I get it. I do. I like rooting for guys. I get why people latch on to those types of players. But the Kings are looking down the barrel of their next era. Anze Kopitar has announced this will be his final NHL season. Drew Doughty is another year older. These are real questions for the Kings that they don't know the long-term answers to. I think Quinton Byfield is a pretty good player. I think Quinton Byfield has the capacity to be a top six center, to be somebody, and top six as in the Kings, not top six as in the NHL. I think that would be a bit of a crazy leap, but there is enough there that I have seen, especially the flash plays. I thought the first two games of the series against the Oilers last year, Byfield really stood out as being noticeable. He has the size and his skating has come a long way. The distribution is there. I don't know what to expect. I'm curious to see what Brand Clark does as somebody who has always been optimistic about those puck-moving defensemen who hates watching them get shoehorned into small roles because coaches don't trust them. I think Clark's a good player. I want to see the Kings give him some real runway so that 2 years from now, when Drew Doughty is towards the end or maybe outright retired, maybe Brand Clark's playing on that first pair of the right side. They lost Vladislav Gavrikov to the Rangers. This is a team that's got a lot of nice individual pieces. I love Kevin Fiala. I've always liked his game dating back to his time in Minnesota. I think Adrian Kempe might be the single most underrated player in the entire NHL. I think he has real 40-goal potential. I like what they've gotten from guys like Philip Deneau, who are never going to light up the stat sheet too crazy. But that's a guy who can make things happen for you, especially defensively. And we have seen the Oilers handle the Kings reasonably well in each of the last couple of years in the first round. Last year was a little more anxiety-inducing than the previous ones, but the Kings are a team that I think are built for the regular season. And there is a difference. I think the Kings have a very high floor by virtue of their style of play being so defense-centric. They got fringe Vezina goaltending out of Darcy Kemper last year. They set a franchise record for points, for home wins. But at the same time, the Kings haven't won a playoff series since they won the Stanley Cup against the Rangers in 2014. That is a franchise desperately looking to figure out where they're going. And they brought in a new GM, Oiler fans very familiar with Ken Holland's stylings. Luc Robitaille is definitely feeling the heat. That is a team that very well could be the first coach to get fired. And I don't think that's particularly fair to Jim Hiller, who I think did a reasonable job last year, got great regular season results out of them. But when it comes to regular season versus playoffs, being one of those defense first teams, it really saps your ability to make things happen, to really push. And I like what the Kings have as far as Byfield, Fiala, Kempe, Brand Clark, and Darcy Kemper, but there isn't a high enough ceiling with this group to seriously scare me in the playoffs. Now, wouldn't shock me in the slightest if the Kings finished ahead of the Oilers in the standings again. I don't think the regular season particularly matters. I think you saw down the stretch of the regular season last year just how much the Oilers cared, for lack of a better word, about where they finished. They, of course, won all of the playoff series leading up to the final where they did not have home ice advantage, and then lost in the Stanley Cup final where they did have home ice advantage. So I do think that's something worth pointing out. And then to tie a bow on this episode, Vegas. The Vegas Golden Knights hat is up there over my shoulder, hanging up on the rack. Got it the last time. Got it. One of my friends got it for me when he was in Vegas last year. That's where I am right now. Actually, I am in Vegas, and I'll be candid with you guys. I picked Vegas to win the Stanley Cup last year. I think Bruce Cassidy is one of the 5 best coaches in the NHL. I think Jack Eichel is the 5th or 6th best center in the league. I worry about their defense. I worry about their goaltending. Alex Pietrangelo, probably medical retirement, really unfortunate, been a really good player for a long time, been a captain on 2 different Stanley Cup teams. That's something that's very rare in the history of the league. This is a really solid team. I am curious how they go about trying to solve their goal scoring problem. As much as I love Mitch Marner, he is more of a facilitator, more of a playmaker than a raw goal scorer. And that makes things awkward, where if he plays with Eichel, one of those guys is going to have to shoot the puck more. And maybe Ivan Barbashev lucks into a 35, 40 goal season because he gets to play with 2 elite playmakers. That's not out of the question. But Vegas's team defense is so good. They manufacture a lot of game control. They manage to make a lot of things happen. But I would like to see the Golden Knights, if I am a Golden Knights fan or I was just taking Golden Knights position, they need to find that next wave of offense. Last year, they played 11 playoff games. They only scored 28 goals. That's not enough. If you want to win the Stanley Cup, you got to be able to score 4 goals a game. And I think Mitch Marner certainly helps. I'll be very curious to see how they deploy their power play. If they can facilitate a trade for Rasmus Anderson, I'm sure that would help as well. I think the Golden Knights will win this division. I think the Oilers and the Kings will jockey for 2 and 3. And don't count the Ducks out and don't count the Canucks out. There is a world where things break right for the Canucks. They did manage to keep Brock Besser, who I've long been a fan of as well. So there's your palate cleanser for the Pacific Division. A very brief overview of the 7 contemporaries the Oilers are facing. I think at worst, on talent, the Oilers are the 3rd best team. I think at best, they are the 2nd best team. I think Vegas is a little bit deeper. I think Edmonton's concentration at the top of their lineup's a little bit better. So it comes down to what you value. We saw what happened last year when they went head-to-head. I'll be curious to see how this year goes. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. To everybody who's tapping back in, summer's winding down, hockey's back. The new listeners or returning listeners who are back in the mix, the numbers I've noticed are up over the last week. Everyone is excited for hockey. I cannot wait to be talking about Flames Oilers at 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday into Thursday morning. I will talk to you guys tomorrow where we are going to talk about hope springing eternal. See you guys then. And until then, let's go Oilers.